Hello, my name is Felipe Gavilan, and in this video, we're going to give an introduction to Hangfire. Hangfire is a tool that allows us to work easily with background jobs. For free, Hangfire allows us to fire jobs in the background, fire delay job in the background, which means that those jobs will not execute immediately, but only after some time, like after 5 minutes, after an hour, after a day, or something like that. Fire recurring job. A recurring job is a job that will execute several times, periodically, like for example every 5 minutes, every hour, daily, weekly, every Wednesday, or whatever. Another thing that it allows us is to use continuations. With continuations we can have a job, and then after that job's finish, then we can execute another job. So we can have some sort of chain of jobs that executes one after the other. And also, for free again, it offers us a dashboard in which we can see the jobs, we can cancel the jobs, delete the jobs, and etc. And I say for free because there is a pro version for Hangfire which allows you to, for example, do batches of jobs, but we are not going to see that in this video. We're only going to focus on the free features of Hangfire. So, why is Hangfire so cool? Well, in order to understand that, we have to learn about the architecture of Hangfire. So, let's take a look. So, this is the basic architecture of Hangfire. We have a Hangfire client, which is the one that creates the jobs. We have a jobs repository, which is the place in which the jobs get stored. The idea is that then we have some sort of repository or database or whatever way you want to call it. We have this place in which we are going to store the jobs so that later they can be retrieved by a Hangfire server. So we have the client that is the one that creates the job, and after the client creates the job, then it immediately returns to the client so that the client doesn't have to wait for the job to be executed. Then we have a Hangfire server. A Hangfire server is the application that actually executes the jobs. So the Hangfire server is going to connect to the database or repository, and then the repository is going to return the pending jobs, and then the server can run those jobs. This is very powerful because it allows us to have decoupled the client that is the one that creates the jobs and the server, which is the one that executes the jobs. So in real life, this Hangfire client could be something like an ASP.NET Core application, maybe a Blazor application, a Web API, or maybe a WPF or WinForms application. It doesn't matter, as long as it is an application that can communicate with the jobs repository. And then we have a server, which can be again another application that is going to connect to the database or to the repository in general, and it is going to retrieve those jobs and it is going to execute them. So this Hangfire server could be something like an ASP.NET application, but also could be a worker service, a Windows service, a console application, or something like that. Something else that we can do is that we can have both the client and the server in the same application, which is what we're going to do in this video. In this video, we're going to create an ASP.NET Core application that is going to be both the client and the server, which means that it is going to create the jobs, but also using a background process, it is going to execute those jobs. And the jobs repository is going to be a SQL Server database, though we're not limited to using this technology because, for example, Hangfire can also work with Redis, for example. But in our case, we're going to use SQL Server. So let's see our application. Alright, so here we are in Visual Studio. We have an ASP.NET Core Web API application. This is a really simple application which has a single entity. I have configured Entity Framework Core, as you can see here, and we have our people DB set, and we have a simple people controller which has this operation. So again, a really simple application. By the way, if you want to follow along, in the description of this video you will find a link to GitHub that has two folders, a before and after, and in the before folder we have this application like this, which is the one that we're going to work on. So let's get started. So first what we're going to do is that we're going to install Hangfire. So in order to install Hangfire, I will go to the Solution Explorer, I will right click on my project, and I will say manage NuGet packages. I will go to browse and I will write here Hangfire, and by using this Hangfire package I get access to the Hangfire core, Hangfire for SQL Server, and Hangfire for ASP.NET Core. So let me install this package. By the way, this is version 1.7.28, so this is the version that we're going to use in this tutorial. Now after that, we're going to get this README, but I don't care about it, so I will just close it and also close the NuGet page. Now I will go to my appsetting.development.json file because it is advised for us to come here to login and include a Hangfire filter. So let me say here information, so that we get in the console or in whatever place we log our messages the information about Hangfire. Also, if I want to, I can have a connection string dedicated to a Hangfire DB. I can do that if I want to. I won't, but I can certainly do that. In my case, I will use the same database that I have here for my application. Of course, in your case, if you want to follow along, you have to maybe update this in order to have a valid server, but in my case, this is enough. Now that we have installed Hangfire, we have to configure it. So let me go to the Solution Explorer. I want to go to the program class, and in here, we have to say builder services at Hangfire control dot using Hangfire, and this is for adding the Hangfire client. Now, there is some default configuration that is advised for us to use that comes from the documentation of Hangfire, but it is a little bit long, so what I will do is that I will just copy and paste this code. So let me copy and paste this. Again, this comes from the official Hangfire documentation. This is the default configuration that they advise us to use. You can see here that we have these SQL Server storage options, which I can bring the namespace of, and we also need the connection string, so let me get that right away. So connection string, builder configuration, get connection string, and here I will put the name of my connection string. In my case, it is default connection, semicolon here, and now this compiles. Now, this is for configuring the Hangfire client, the one that is going to create the jobs. Now, as I mentioned before, we're also going to use this application as a Hangfire server. Therefore, I will come here and I will say builder services at Hangfire server, and I will use a default configuration for this one also. Now finally, I have to configure the dashboard, because through the dashboard we are going to be able to see the jobs, cancel them, and so on. So let me say here, after use authorization, I will say app.use Hangfire dashboard, and that's it. Now if we execute our application, we are going to see that in our database, we are going to get the Hangfire tables. Let's go to SQL Server Management Studio. Here we have our Intro to Hangfire database. I can refresh here, and you're going to see that now we have Hangfire counter, Hangfire job, and so on. In this Hangfire job table, we can see all of the jobs that we have. Let's see that. First, let me come here because I want to show you something. I want to show you that dashboard that I just mentioned. Let me say duplicate. Let's come here and let me write Hangfire. And you're going to see that we have this dashboard in which we can visualize our jobs. As you can see here, we have jobs, we have enqueued jobs, scheduled jobs, processing, succeeded, failed, deleted, and awaiting. We also have retries, we have recurring jobs, and we have servers. So this is great. Now, obviously, there is nothing here because we haven't fired our first job, so let's get to work on that. Let me come back to Visual Studio and let's do our first example. Let's come to People Controller and let's see that here we have this operation that it is kind of slow. It is slow because it has this task delay 5 seconds, but the point is that we have a slow operation and maybe we want to run it in the background so that the user doesn't have to wait for it. So we can do that with Hangfire very easily. So what we're going to do first is that we are going to come here and we're going to inject a background job client control dot, to import the Hangfire namespace background job client, and I will assign it as a field. Let me put this here so that you can visualize everything. And before doing this example, I will do a really simple example so that we can get used to using Hangfire. So let me say here, background job client.enqueue. This enqueue function is the one that allows me to fire something in the background and basically forget about it. So this will run a job in the background and I will be able to continue the execution of this method. Let's see that. Let me come here. We have to pass a lambda expression, so I can say something like this, and here I can do whatever I want. For example, I can say console write line, and I will just pass the person name. So person name. I wanted to say person name, alright, semicolon here. And that's it. With this we have our first example. Let me save. Let me click on always rebuild and rebuild and apply changes so that every time we save our application, it reveals. So let me come here. Now let's come here. Now, see something. See that here in succeeded, we don't have anything, right? So now let me go to Swagger. Let me click on here, try it out, and I will write a name here. Let me just write my name, Felipe, execute. And we're going to see that here, in succeeded, we have a 1. If we click on here, we're going to see that now we have the job that we just fired using the enqueue function. And we can click on it, and we're going to see something very interesting. And it is that we're going to see the code that was executed inside of the job. Here we have console write line Felipe, which is exactly what we have here. Console write line person name, but person name has the value Felipe, and therefore that is why we have Felipe here. And of course, if we go to the console, let me come to the console, you are going to see that we have Felipe here. And not only that, see that we have added the person Felipe here, right? So if we go back here, and we're going to see that we have this requeue button. This requeue button will allow me to rerun this method that we have here. Let's see that. Let me put this here. I want to do this just so that you can see the console while I click on this requeue button. So let me click, and as you can see, we have Felipe here. I can click on it several times, and then that will rerun the job and therefore rerun this functionality, this function, this code that we have here, which is awesome because it means that from this dashboard we can rerun jobs at our will. But how does this work? Well, remember that I said that here in this job table we have our jobs. So let's take a look. Select top 1000, and we're going to see that indeed what we have here is a invocation data field, and in this invocation data field we have system console write line, and then in arguments we have Felipe. So what is going on here is that Hangfire saved the information of the job serialized into JSON in our job table, and then from the server I am able to load this information and then run it using simple C# code. So that is why I am able to rerun this function from the UI, because this is just a record in a database, and therefore I can just load it and run it. And of course, if we make another job, we're going to get another row in this table. Let's see that. Let me come here. Let me come to Swagger UI. Let me say Claudia. Execute. Let's come back here. In succeeded, now we have another line, which is console write line for Claudia. And see that we have job ID number 2. And indeed, if we come back here and I press F5, we're going to see that we have job ID equal to 2, and the argument is Claudia this time. Therefore, we can see that we have all of the jobs here in this job table. Now, that was a basic example of enqueue. Now, what we're going to do is that we're going to do our real example, which is the one that involves Entity Framework Core. So, let's go back to Visual Studio. Let me comment this out because this was just an example. What I want to do is to enqueue this code that we have here. So let me try this. This is not going to work, but I want you to see it. Let me try this. Let's say that I want to put a body here so that I can cut all of this inside of this. Will it work? No, it won't work. Why it won't work? Well, because this is an expression. This is a tree expression. And we can't have a body like this here. So what can we do? Well, the first solution that we're going to try is to simply move this into a method and call the method from here. Let's see that. Let me come here. Let's say public async task create person, and I will say person name, and then I will cut all of this and I will paste that here, and then I will eliminate this body from here, and I will just say create person, and I will pass the person name, which is a parameter that we're getting from here. Now, this actually works. As you can see, this compiles. Let me save. This will compile the application, and let me come here so that you can see that this indeed works. Let me say here, for example, Robert. Let me execute, and we're going to see that immediately we got back a response, and if we go back here, we're going to see that after a few seconds, you can see that we have added the person Robert, and we have the query that inserts Robert into the person table. And if we go back to SQL Server Management Studio and we go to the people table, you can see that indeed we have Robert here. Therefore, this is working. Now, this may be fine for a small application, but I really don't like it. I don't like it because you are tightly coupling this execution to this implementation. I would prefer to use a service behind an interface so that we have some flexibility in our application. So let's see how to do that. Let me first come here. I will create a new folder. I'll call it services. And then in services, I am going to create a class which is going to be called people repository. And inside of people repository, we are going to take this code from here, and I will paste it here, and then I need to bring some namespaces like person, and then after that I need to bring the application DB context. I need to inject it, so let me do that. Context, let me say context, control dot, assign as a field, and also I will use iLogger just so that you can see that we can inject as many services here as we want. So let me say here people repository logger control dot assign as a field, and then in here I will substitute this console write line for the logger, so log information. This is way better than using console write line, and let me put this here also. Now again, I want to have this behind an interface, so just to save some time, I will just put the interface here. So people repository, and then I will say that we will implement that interface, and here in create person I will say control dot pull up, and then that will put this code here. Alright, so now we have to configure these services in the dependency injection system. So for that we're going to go to the program class, and we're going to come here and we're going to say builder services are scoped, then people repository. Let me bring the namespace, and then people repository. Alright, so now we can use this people repository service for our enqueue function. Let's go to the people controller class, and instead of doing this, I will delete this, and I will say here, I will pass the people repository. Control dot to import the services namespace, and then here, in the lambda expression, I can say repository, and then repository dot, and this is an instance, by the way, this is an instance of the class that implements the service people repository. So in our case, because we configured it here, this is an instance of the people repository class. So here we have the people repository class. I mean in execution time, of course. So let me say here create person, and here I will pass the person name parameter. So let me put this in another line so that you can visualize everything better. Alright, so we should be good to go. Let me comment this out because we don't really need it anymore. Now, as you can see, we are hiding the implementation of the create person functionality behind this interface, which is more flexible because now in unit tests, we could mock this if we wanted to. So let me save, let's see that everything works. Let me come back to Google Chrome. Instead of Robert, I will say Melissa, and I will say execute. Again, we get back immediately a response, and if we come here, you can see that after a few seconds, we're going to get the insert into people query, so that we have added the person Melissa. And of course, if we come back here, you can see that we have Melissa here. Excellent. So we have seen how to use the enqueue method. Now, let's see how to use the schedule method. The schedule method is the one that allows you to create a job that is going to be delayed. That means that instead of being fired immediately, it is going to be fired perhaps after a few seconds, or after a few minutes, or after a few hours, depending on how you configure it. So let's see that. Let me come here. I will come here to Visual Studio. And let me say here, HTTP post, we're going to create another endpoint. I'll say schedule. So let me say public async task action result. Let me say action result. I'll say here schedule. Again, a string person name. And then I will say background job client dot schedule. And it works the same way as enqueue, so that I can pass, for example, a lambda expression here, or if I wanted to, I could pass a service like the iPeople repository service and then use that service here. But in my case, I will make a simple example, so I don't really need a service. I just need a lambda expression, and I need to say console write line, and then I will say the name is, and then I will say person name. But we're not finished yet, because now I need to pass when do I want this to be run? When do I want this expression to be run, this job to be run? So I can use a time span for that. I can say time span. I can say from seconds. I can say, for example, in 10 seconds and put a semicolon here. Or I can say, for example, from minutes, and say after 15 minutes, or I can say from hours, and then after, let's say, 13 hours, or something like that. I can define after how much time I want this job to run. Now, of course, because we are making a tutorial, I'll just say from seconds, and I will say something like 3 seconds, something simple, something short. So let's say return OK. Now, I am going to save here, and this should refresh my application, but sometimes I need to help it, so I will just refresh manually. So we have a schedule here. Let me say try it out. We are going to say Felipe, and let me put this like this because I want to have the console open. So let me come here. Let me say Felipe, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so it took about 11 seconds for Felipe to appear here. Why is that? Didn't we say that we wanted to have it so that this job will execute after 3 seconds? Well, yeah, but there is something that I need to explain to you. Remember that I said that the Hangfire server is the one that has the task to query the jobs repository, the place where we store the jobs. It has to then get the pending jobs and execute those jobs, right? That is the role of the server in a Hangfire solution. But the server does not repeatedly make requests to the database. It does it on a 15-second interval. So that is why we didn't get this immediately, because sometimes it may have to wait 15 seconds for the server to try to fetch the jobs from the database and then be able to run them. So how can we modify that 15 seconds interval? Well, we can do that in the program class. We can come here and remember that we have this add Hangfire server, which means that here I can configure the parameters of our Hangfire server, the settings. So I can say here options, and then in here I will say options.schedule polling interval, and in here I can say time span dot from seconds, and let's say 1. So this means that we are polling for new jobs once a second. Now, this may not be that smart to do because it could be a bottleneck for your database. Because once a second, you would be making a query to it. So this may not be what you want, especially in normal scenarios, but let me just test this so that you can see that indeed we're going to get the scheduled job faster in the console. So I already built the application, so let me put this back as it was. Let me come here, let me put this like this. Let me come here, schedule, and let me say here Felipe 2, execute. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so more or less 4 seconds, which is fine, and it is definitely better than the 11 seconds that we took in the previous example. So as you can see, what we have is that we have this scheduled polling interval that defines how frequently we're going to query the database, query the jobs repository to see if there are pending jobs. Now, it may not be that smart to say that we're going to do that every second, so I will delete this so that we have the default configuration of 15 seconds. So let me save, let me Ctrl F5 just to make sure that we have this applied in the settings of our ASP.NET Core application, and let's continue. Now, let's see something. Let's come here to the people controller, and instead of from seconds, I will say from minutes. I want to say 5 minutes because I want us to have more time. So let me say save. Let me come here. Let me maximize this because what I want to do is that, again, I want to write here Felipe, or let me just say Claudia, just to say something different. Let me execute. Of course, it will take 5 minutes for Claudia to appear here in the console, but what is cool is that I can come here to the Hangfire dashboard and I can go to schedule and I can see that job that has been scheduled. As you can see here, it says that this job that we have here will be executed in 5 minutes. And if I click on it, you can see that we have the name is Claudia, which is this code that we have here. The name is Claudia. So I can visualize this, but what can I do with it? Well, I can delete it. Let's say that I don't want this to be run. So I can just delete it. Okay, and now we don't have the job here anymore, and therefore I have been able to stop the job from executing, which is great because maybe sometimes you will have a job that you don't want to be executed, so you can just stop it with a few clicks. You don't even have to write code for it. Something else that I want to show you is that I can come here to Swagger. Let me say that now I will say Robert again, execute. Again, we have Robert here. It will get executed in 5 minutes. That is great. But let me say that I close this. Let me say that I come to the console and I shut down the application, pressing Ctrl C. So I just shut down the application, the whole application, the server and the client. So I close everything. I close the client and I close the server. But if I rerun the application, let me press Ctrl F5 to run the application. Now we have Swagger here. Let me duplicate this. Because I want to open the Hangfire dashboard, you are going to see that now here in jobs, in schedule, we still have our job. Why is that? Well, remember that we have our jobs here in the database, in the job table, which means that indeed, since we have this job here that says scheduled, then it means that even if we shut down our application, when we load back the application up, it means that the job will be there and then Hangfire will be able to take it and then run it after the 3 minutes passes. So let me come here. This is great. We are done with this. Now let's talk about recurring jobs. Now, the difference between a delayed job and a recurring job is that a delayed job runs after, for example, a few minutes, and a recurring job runs periodically, for example, in intervals of 5 minutes or in intervals of 1 hour, which is hourly or daily or weekly or monthly. So the delayed job executes once, but the recurring job executes several times until we stop it, of course. So let's learn how to do a recurring job in Hangfire. So what we're going to do is that we're going to make again another simple example, writing in the console, but I will use a service. So let me come here to services, add class, I'll call it time service, and I will come here. This is really simple code, so I will just copy and paste it. Alright, so as you can see here, we have this code, we have this print now method, and we have logger log information, datetime now, and we're just printing today's date and time. Again, I will use an interface, so I will say public interface I time service, and then I will come here and put this like this and pull this up. Alright, so now I have to configure this iTime service in the program class. So let me come here and let's say builder services at transient iTime service time service, and now I can use it. I can use it for creating a recurring job based on this time service because I want to, let's say, execute this function once a minute. So let me go to the program class. One place in which I like to put this is after this use Hangfire dashboard. So here in the HTTP pipeline. Why here? Because it means that then this function will get automatically configured as a recurring job once we load the application, which means that this is always going to run, at least once. So let me say here, recurring job.add or update, and in here I can do iTime service, and in here I can pass the name of the recurring job. It is important to have an ID or name for the recurring job because that way, even if we execute this function several times, it doesn't mean that we're going to have several instances of the recurring job running simultaneously. So let me say here, for example, print time. Of course, you can give it a descriptive name depending on the task that it's going to do. Like if it is about sending emails, you can say send emails or something like that. But in my case, print time is fine. So here I will put service and then service print now. This is the function that I want to execute once a minute. Now here I can say cron dot and then say daily, for example, if I want to execute this functionality once a day, or maybe minutely, once a minute, or maybe hourly, once an hour, or if I want to, I can use a cron expression. Like I can say, for example, this like this, and this means once a minute anyway, but using a cron expression, which allows me to be very specific about the time in which I want to execute my recurring job. So just to keep it simple, I will just say cron.minutely, and that is great. Now let me run my application. So let me save. I will press Ctrl F5 anyway, because I like to make sure that when I modify the program class, I get the latest version of it for my application, because sometimes hot reload doesn't work very well when I modify the program class. So let's come here. And let's see that here we already have our recurring job. We have a recurring job that says that we're going to execute iTime service.print now. Now, if we go to the console, let me go to the console, and you are going to see that we have the current date and time here. Now, I have to wait 1 minute more in order to have this being executed again, so I will just forward the video to that part. And as you can see here, 1 minute has passed, so we have that our function was executed again. Now let me show you that we can update this job that we have here. For example, and let me put this here so that you can visualize everything. Let's say that I want to update how frequently this function runs. So let me say instead of minutely, I will say, for example, daily. So daily, and therefore I can save. Again, press Ctrl F5. And I will come back here, and you're going to see that now we have that this will run in 5 hours. Awesome. So we have now that this job will not run every minute, but every 24 hours. So let me come back here, and let's see the final part of this tutorial, which is continuations. As I mentioned before, you can have it so that after you finish a job, you can run another job so that you can have a chain of jobs. Let's see that. Let me come to the people controller class. Let's come to schedule and let's see something before we do the continuation. Let's see something. Let's see that we have this green squiggly line here because this is not really async, because when you use Hangfire, you are not really doing asynchronous programming. So you don't really need to use async here nor here. So let me put this like this, and that is great. Alright, I can save. And you can see that now we don't have anything bad going on here. So now let's go to the continuation example. So what I want to do is that I need to get the ID of the job that I am going to execute. So this schedule and these enqueue functions actually return a string, which is the job ID. So I can say job ID. And let me put this like this so that you can visualize everything. And then with this job ID, what I can do is that I can say something like background client continue with, and in here I can pass the job ID, and then in here I can put whatever job I want to run after we finish executing this job that we have here. So let me say again a simple example of console write line. So let me say console write line. I will say, let me put here this for using string interpolation. So the job ID has finished. Alright, so let me put this again in another line, and this is great. Let me put here a parenthesis that is missing. Let me save. Now let's go back to Google Chrome and let me come here to schedule, try it out. Let me see, by the way, we have here 5 minutes. I don't want to have to wait this time, so let me say from seconds. 5 seconds is just okay. So let me save. Let me come back here. Let me say Felipe. Let me execute, and let's see that here we're going to have to wait a few seconds in order to get Felipe, but after we get Felipe, we're going to get the message that the job 11 in this case has finished. So as you can see, we were able to run this job that we have here only after this job that we have here finished. So that's about it. This was an introduction to Hangfire. Hope you like it, and if you want to learn more about .NET, React, Angular, Blazor, and other technologies, please check out my Udemy courses. There is a link in the description of this video with all of my courses with a discount applied. Thank you.